This is Revolutionizing Recruitment with Kathleen Duffy, the art of attracting, acquiring, and retaining talent. Here's Kathleen.
I'm thrilled to welcome Whitney Johnson to the podcast. As the CEO of Disruption Advisors, Whitney is a globally recognized thought leader, keynote speaker, executive coach, and consultant. Her groundbreaking ideas on personal disruption and innovation have made her a top business thinker with nearly 2 million followers on LinkedIn. We're going to discuss her passion for personal growth and transformation and the secrets to building high-performing teams, transforming companies, and creating a culture of innovation. Whitney, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kathleen. I am delighted to be here.
Well, I always am curious about how people got to where they are. You have an undergraduate degree in music and a minor in English. So when you ventured off to the university, what were some of your career goals at that time?
You know, Kathleen, I don't think I had very many career goals when I started university. I knew my goal was to get a degree, and the plan was to get a degree in music. And partly because that's just what I had always planned on doing and something I think my mother wanted me to do in many respects. And I had this vague notion that I was going to get married. Maybe I would work, but that's about as far as I had planned. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, I think music, I do a lot of work for Arizona State University, and people will ask the president, I have a senior in high school. I'm trying to get him or her to study fill in the blank, engineering, accounting. And he's like, music is a great major because it helps just in how you think. And if you have an English major or minor in this case, it helps you to be a great writer. So I think you clearly hit it out of the ballpark. So how did this journey that you started, was a little ambiguous, right? How did it lead you to becoming the world's authority on smart growth and personal disruption?
Yeah, it's interesting. So building on what I just said about this sense of I didn't know what I want to do, I actually spoke to a group of college students not too long ago, and it's an important thing to underscore briefly, which is at least half of all college students change their major. Only 1 in 4 works in their major. And so there's just this messiness when you start out at the beginning of your adult life, whether it's college or your career, and you don't necessarily know what you want to do. Then necessity can tend to take over. So I had graduated with a degree in music. My husband and I had moved to New York. He was getting his PhD, and so which didn't, pay, and so we needed to eat. And I had to go out and get a job. And I had made the decision that I did not want to work in music. And as a music major with really not a clear sense of what she wanted to do, not a lot of confidence, and being a woman, this is the late 80s, early 90s, I started out as a secretary and working for a retail stockbroker. But then something interesting happened. You asked sort of where was there some purchase or some traction that started to build in. I would go to work every day, and I would sit next to these stockbrokers, all aspiring masters of the universe, and hear them say things like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that this is a good stock for you to buy. And they would say things like, throw down your pom-poms and get in the game. And initially, I was a little offended because I was a cheerleader in high school. But as I heard them, and they were actually all men, as I heard them say that over and again, I had this epiphany or this moment or this awakening of I need to throw down my pom-poms. And so I started taking these business courses at night. I took accounting and finance and economics. And then I think because my mom actually had always worked, so there was some piece in my wiring of having seen a woman work. And then I had a boss who believed in me that gave me this opportunity to move from being a secretary into investment banking. And even though I wasn't necessarily very directed about what I wanted to do, I was still very ambitious and driven. And so now I had this goal of this brass ring of, oh, Wall Street, this is exciting. I want to be successful here, just like in school, I wanted to get A's. I want to be successful on Wall Street. So there was this combination of all these things that kicked in. And that was really the beginning of my career.
Interesting. You say you have a boss that believed in me, and I think that that is so critical for our young people today. Is somebody that believes in us and somebody who takes a chance on us. So, bravo to that person that did that.
Mm.
So now let's talk about your book, Smart Growth:
Yep.
How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company. I loved it. It's been a philosophy that I have personally always embraced. So, what inspired you to write it? You've written other books before. What was it about this one that you needed
Mm.
to put to pen to paper?
Yeah, it's such an important question, isn't it? Because we invest a lot of time and energy and finances into getting a book written and published. And so, why this book? Well, the reason I wrote this particular book is that I had, as you said, written 2 prior books. One was called Disrupt Yourself and Build an A Team. And both of those books were about using this framework of disruption that we think about from a product and service and business context and applying it to the individual and then applying it to building a team. Well, one of the things that I had done in both of those books is I had this thing that was kind of in the background of those books. It was sort of this script playing in the background, which was called the S curve of learning. And what I discovered is that it was a supporting character, supporting actor. But I remember when I had published Build an A Team and I was publicizing it, I had a conversation actually with Dan Pink. And he said, "Well, what do you want to talk about in the 2 or 3 minutes that we're going to feature you?" And I said, "Well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this?" And finally he said, "Well, what about the S curve?" And I thought, the S curve, that's in the background. And I figured out that people were saying, this is useful. This S curve helps me understand what growth looks like. It helps me have a map. More importantly, it helps me understand what growth feels like. And so I had this big aha that we needed to write a book where the S curve was not the supporting actor, but it was the lead actor, and give people the tools to really, as you're thinking about change, as you're thinking about growth, give them this very simple, this very visual tool of what growth looks and feels like. And so that was the animating force behind writing this particular book at this time.
I really do want to talk about the S curve of learning, but let's go back to the phrase, the term smart growth. How do you define that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways that you can think about this. Is when I think about growth, there is what I would consider dumb growth, which is where you are growing, but it's kind of like the cancer cells where you are growing to the exclusion of everybody else. Like your growth requires that other people do not grow. So, one definition of smart growth is when you think about this from an ecosystem standpoint, as you are growing, you are making it possible for the people around you to grow. So, that's one way to think about the notion of smart growth. Another way to think about it is that because you've got this S curve, which is this very simple map of what growth looks like, it allows you to not walk in circles. It allows you to be smart about it, because when you know where you are on this map, you're going to know what's next. So again, you're getting smarter about it. But then also there's this idea of a smart device, which is, again, when you've got these sensors that tell you how many steps you've taken or how many steps you need to take or how much you've eaten or what your heart rate is. By the same token, when you've got this S curve, it allows you to, in effect, have this smart device of, where am I in my growth? And do I feel like there's continuing to be growth for me in this particular role, in this organization at this time? That's going to predict how long I stay there. So it also allows you to take the pulse of where you are in your growth in a particular role. So, a number of different ways to think about it. It allows you to have that map. It allows you to think about virtuous versus vicious growth. And it also gives you this way, this sensor, if you will, to measure whether or not you feel like or you're having the experience of growing.
Yeah, I love that dumb growth, smart growth, because you think about these people that start their businesses and it's all about making money.
Mhm.
And I would consider them the dumb growth kind of people because they focus on the wrong thing. We can't do anything without our people, right?
Right.
You talk a lot about smart growth leaders in your book. What are some of the characteristics that drove you to put them into the smart growth leader category?
Yeah. So as I think about it from a definitional standpoint, and then if there are certain people that you would like me to highlight, I'm happy to do that. But as you're thinking about this S curve of, okay, I'm on this curve. And if I think about it as a metaphorically as a mountain, I do need to climb this curve myself. Like as an agent of myself, I need to make those moves along that curve. And we talk about these accelerants a lot in the book Disrupt Yourself, these ways that I can change and improve that allow me to build momentum along that curve, whether it's taking the right kinds of risks or embracing my constraints or playing to my strengths. But there's another element, which is as you think about climbing that curve, what is the ecosystem like? What are those weather patterns like? Is it rainy? Is it snowing? Or is it sunny and breezy? And when you think about a smart growth leader is the ecosystem. We know that people, don't quit jobs; they quit bosses. It's sort of 70% of their happiness at work. And so, a smart growth leader is a person who creates this ecosystem in which you can grow that makes it possible for you to grow. And we think about the ecosystem in four different ways of there's a conducive component to it, which is as a leader, you're making sure that people have the tools that they need to do their job, whether it's yep, I've made sure you've got a computer or you've got the training that you need, but those basic tools of doing that work. A smart growth leader gives you this opportunity to feel connected to the work that you're doing or the work that the organization's doing, to the work that you specifically are doing, but also creates an environment where people feel connected with each other as opposed to at odds with each other, and is very deliberate and very intentional about doing things like instead of just rewarding, hey, you did a good job. Instead, I really appreciate how you two collaborated on this thing in order to move it forward. So they're continually rewarding people for working together. And then the other two that we really look at is it a person who allows for resilience, who makes it possible when mistakes are made? There isn't this sense of you are bad and this is a referendum on your worthiness to show up in this universe, but instead, what's going to be the ROI on this mistake? What systemically wasn't working? This isn't necessarily something that you may not assuming that you tried, right? That's important. That's a given, but that's you're making that effort to move along the curve. But systemically, what wasn't in place and what can we learn from this? And then finally, this deep sense that my manager, you as my leader are invested in my growth, whether it's here or whether it's somewhere else, because you believe that if you help me grow, not only will you be more productive, but also if at some point you outgrow this organization, you will become an ambassador. And because you help people grow, people want to work for you and to go to your area of expertise. That will make recruiting very easy because you now know that if you go work for that person, they are going to help you grow and develop, which is one of the deepest longings and yearnings of the human soul. So that's what a smart growth leader does, is they create this ecosystem that's conducive, that's connected, that's resilient, that's nurturing, that it creates the conditions where the people that are on their watch are able to grow.
Nice. So, you talk about allowing for resilience and being able to learn from your mistakes. And I always joke that I have a PhD in screwing up. Um,
I
I
love
think
that.
about I think about, starting my business. I had no business plan. I had nothing. I've broken up with business partners and things like that. What are some of the important lessons that you've learned by taking some of these risks and maybe even failing?
You mean like getting a PhD just like you and screwing up?
Which school did you
Uh,
go to?
yeah, exactly. So we had this experience actually just this week with our team. We've got this assessment tool that I just mentioned where you can see where you are in your growth, and we're building that and we're going to version 2.0. And there was a conversation that was being had with the developers that are doing this work. And all of a sudden, there was this recognition that there had been this major disconnect between what they thought they were building and what we thought they were building. And one of the things that I was so happy about as I think about the culture that we're creating is that it was a big miss. Like we messed up in terms of not being clear on what it was that we wanted and expected. And my business partner, her name is Amy Humble, I was so happy because she said, there was initial thing of she wanted, that initial sense of I want to blame someone. I want this to be someone's fault because then it won't have to be my fault, right? There's that human tendency. And I was so impressed because what she did is she said, "We all own this. I own this. We all own this. So what do we want to do with this? We need to change it. We need to fix it. We're going to learn from it and we're going to move forward." But there was no blame given. It was just what
Mhm.
was not working with the system. And I think that takes a tremendous amount of maturity. So that's a small thing. So I give you that as an example because that's what's the ROI going to be on this failure? Well, we're going to figure out how to communicate better and make sure that we check earlier. And we're also recognizing that we've got better relationships now because we went through this thing and we're going to be resilient and we're going to find the ROI. Now, let me give an example that's on the PhD example because that was like undergraduate example. So PhD example would be probably about close to 15 years ago. I decided that I had a friend who had this idea for a magazine that she wanted to start. And when you talk to me about your dreams, I'm kind of like a Pavlov's dog. Like I just start to salivate. What's your dream? Let's make it happen. I get super excited. And I got really excited about this magazine idea that she had and decided we should back this magazine. And so I got my husband involved, who had made the decision to be out of academia for a few years. I get my husband involved. We invested money in it. But one of the things that we did is even though we were very involved, we had invested money, we did not have controlling or majority ownership. We had
Mm.
just made a handshake deal. We did not do our due diligence. We did not have contracts in place. We did not do the work that you need to do when you are forming a partnership. And I'm sure you can see this coming. It ended badly, very
Mhm.
badly. We lost a lot of money. I had kind of made this decision without consulting with my husband, so that kind of frayed our relationship for a time. We repaired it, but it
Mhm.
was difficult for a moment and lost a friend too. So lost a friend, lost money, had to repair the relationship. So what did I learn? Well, I learned that now when I want to make a big decision, a financial decision, I consult with my partner, my life partner, who is my
Mhm.
husband. And so that is very important. If there are people in your life that, and by the way, he was saying not to do it, so I didn't listen. So if there are
Mhm.
people in your life that are truth tellers, listen to them. That's the first thing. The second thing is don't commit more money than you can be ready to lose. Number two. And number three, and this is one that I have applied more recently, is that when you decide that you want to go into business with someone, make sure that you take the time to really be careful about structuring your partnership agreement. Have lots and lots and lots of conversations over the course of an extended period of time. Make sure you have many times where you have been triggered so that you know what it's like when you're triggered and can you walk through that and walk past that once you're triggered when you're in a partnership, and only get the lawyers in when you're ready to paper it because it can become very adversarial. And I'm happy to say in this area, I don't know that I have a PhD yet, but we're working on it, is that with my business partner now, Amy, who I mentioned earlier, we took a year and a half to negotiate our agreement, our partnership agreement at Disruption Advisors. But we were very careful. We were very deliberate. We were very methodical. There were tears had, but now we have a very good, solid partnership in place. And the recognition, and then I'll stop. It's harder to dissolve a partnership than it is a marriage. And so
Mhm.
we have this very clear conversation of like, this is like getting married.
Mhm.
So, are we committed so that even on those days where we're like, I don't think I'm having very much fun, and I'm not even sure if I like you right now, we
Uh-huh.
are still committed to making this work. And that to me, I don't know that I could have as good of a partnership agreement and working relationship today if I had not had that experience 15 years ago that was disastrous on so many levels.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It seems very I'm going, "Oh, yes. Oh, yes." Mine was in real estate, so, I can relate to everything. So, what I heard, you say is that you went slow to go fast.
Yes.
which is the whole S curve of learning.
Mhm.
And as I was reading the book, and you did have that assessment tool that you mentioned, and I took it, and I landed at the launch point. And I was really surprised that I was
Mm.
there because I've been in business for 32 years. But how I was thinking through my responses is that I am at a point where I have to start planning my exit strategy. And so I thought, yes, I am really at that go slow to go fast piece. So maybe for those people who haven't read the book yet and are not familiar with the S curve of learning, can you explain that to our listeners?
Yes, I would love to. I'll explain it and then I can tie it back to the experience that you're having that I think is very interesting. So the S curve itself was popularized by Everett Rogers back in the 1960s. So it's not new. He used it to help us understand how groups change over time. People will sometimes refer to it as the adoption curve when you're thinking about product rollouts. We had used it at the Disruptive Innovation Fund that I co founded with Clay Christensen in our investing. And that's when I first became familiar with it. But then I had this big aha or really insight that you could use the S curve to understand how you and I as individuals change over time or how we learn and grow. So I want you to picture in your mind an S. I want you to draw it. So to go from left to right, you're going to have three major parts of the curve. There's going to be the launch point, the sweet spot, and mastery. The launch point, it looks sort of flat. Then there's the sweet spot, which is a steep part of the curve. And then there's the mastery, which is kind of flat as well. So, whenever you start something new, what's happening in your brain is it's running this predictive model of what is it going to take for me to go from the launch point or the bottom of this curve or this lower plateau to the upper plateau. And at the launch point, most of your predictions are inaccurate. And so, dopamine, which is the chemical messenger of delight, it drops. So, even though you're really thrilled that you're doing something new, you're also going to experience feelings of discouragement or overwhelm. You can feel impatient. Why am I not figuring this out faster? You can feel like an imposter of like, I shouldn't actually be here. And what's happening there is growth. Um, it's actually really fast mathematically, but because it's not apparent, it feels slow and it feels like a slog. And why that's important is it helps you understand why it's hard to start something new and it normalizes the experience. So you just said you're on the launch point of your next. You don't know what you're doing yet. You're figuring it out. And so it's going to feel really uncomfortable. But what I love about this S curve is it allows you to say, I feel uncomfortable. I feel awkward. I feel gangly. I feel unsure. Situation normal. This is how I'm supposed to feel. And that is so, so comforting to be able to talk yourself through that experience. So that's the launch point. Now, then, as you do this work of moving through and exploring and collecting and figuring out, yes, I actually do want to be here. Because sometimes we get pushed onto curves that we don't want to be on. But
Mhm,
yes, I want to be
mhm.
here. You tip into the sweet spot. And that's something that was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell in The Tipping Point. Now, the sweet spot is this place where your predictions are increasingly accurate. And so the dopamine is spiking, which means you're getting these emotional upside surprises. It feels exhilarating. You feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And growth here is not only fast, it also feels fast, which is why once you start, it's easy. The momentum takes over and it's easy to keep going. Then the third part of the curve, that upper plateau, is the place of mastery. Now, when I say mastery, I mean that whatever it is you intended to do, you feel like you've accomplished it. It doesn't mean you're the world's foremost expert in whatever it is. It just means I had this goal of what I wanted to do. I wanted to learn 5 songs on the ukulele, or I wanted to get these 3 things done in this particular role, and I've done them. I've accomplished them. What's happening now is your predictive model is mostly accurate. So you're getting a little bit of dopamine, but not a lot. And growth here is, in fact, slow. So here's the dilemma. And this is something that you probably experienced not too long ago, now that you're finding yourself on a launch point, is that on the one hand, our brains love to be on the top of that curve, master of all we survey. It's the
Mhm.
status quo. It is very, very, very comfortable. Whether we like it or not, it's still comfortable. But because our brain needs dopamine, and because learning is the oxygen of human growth, and because frequently when you're in that mastery place, you have this feeling inside that there's still more for you to do on this planet, you make the decision not to stay where you are because you don't want the plateau to become a precipice. You make the decision to keep climbing, to say, this is not the summit, it is a summit, to sometimes jump to a new curve, but you do make the decision that you are going to continue to grow by continuing to move along this S curve or find new S curves. And the understanding of this S curve allows you to understand what growth looks and feels like. It gives you that map. It allows you to get smart about growth. And I would argue, and this is the last thing I'll say, that peak performance is not just being in that sweet spot. Peak performance is understanding this entire growth cycle and to be able to iterate so that as soon as you get to the top of a curve, you're ready and able and have the capacity to navigate new launch points.
I love that you said it's, you feel comfortable, because I know for me personally, because that bottom of the S curve is slow, it can be frustrating for others while they wait for me to do that learning piece of it. And I'm wondering how, if you see that in others as they're trying to do their, like managers, as they're looking at this S curve to develop their employees and create these new opportunities for growth.
Oh, Kathleen, you just raised such an important point, which is, so we've been talking about the experience, the individual experience of being on the launch point, and you just flipped it to, so what does that mean for a manager? And especially as you're onboarding someone, and what people need at the launch point is they know they're slow. Like you just said, you're slow. You know that you're not, going to be able to do things as fast as you'll eventually be able to do them. So you don't actually need anybody to tell you that. So what a manager can do is, by, again, understanding this, is to be able to say, they're going to be slow at first. So I need to be aware of that. What am I going to do, though, that's going to allow them to build momentum as quickly as possible? So I need to make it safe for them to be uncomfortable and not know what they're doing, because that's part of the reason why I wanted them at this organization, because they will have a fresh perspective. So how do I make it safe? I talked in the book about an individual, Marco Tricoce, who was the CTO at Four Seasons, and he went in and he thought, I need to accomplish now, fast, this sense of I've got to prove myself. And his manager said, no, that's not what I want you to do. I actually want you to take 6 months and get to know people, explore, be at this launch point, build these relationships that you're going to need once you actually have a plan for what you want to do differently and how you want to transform IT here in our organization. So as a manager, what people need at the launch point, they need support, and that looks like that emotional support of normalizing the experience. It can mean training. It can mean giving people deliverables that are about putting a process in place that will allow them to be successful, not necessarily outcomes immediately. And also, the other thing I would add is it means feedback. Here's what's
Mhm.
working. Here's what you're doing well, and here's what isn't working. And being willing, basically from day one, when something doesn't work, to correct that, so that you've built those neural pathways immediately for, here's how we engage when something doesn't work, because that's where things go off the rails. Things aren't working. We don't want to say anything. It's the first day. We don't want to say anything the second day. And then we're not in the habit of saying something. So then it gets to be of sort of magnificent proportions. And then we don't want to say anything. And then before you know it, they have derailed and they've fallen off the curve. So that would be the other thing I'd say, is support comes in the form of emotional, here's the experience you're having. You're at the launch point. training and also giving feedback so that they can course correct quickly. And then those small goals that you can give them, actually, like with Marco Tricocci, give him small goals of going to meet people, which he can do, which gives him dopamine because he met the expectations. So you can get dopamine even at the launch point that allows you to build momentum and move into the sweet spot.
Yeah. And I want to talk more about getting into the sweet spot, but we have to take a break. Coming up in the second part of my conversation with Whitney Johnson, the CEO of Disruption Advisors, Whitney shares the impact her mother had on her life and career.
I just appreciate her persistence of going from a really small town and going to college and just disrupting herself and disrupting the life that she had and making a better life for herself. And that has definitely influenced me in the sense of how do I make a better life for myself and how do I disrupt myself from the position of where I am.
This has been Revolutionizing Recruitment with Kathleen Duffy. To connect with Kathleen or to learn more about recruitment research, go to duffygroup.com.